So now we're going to discuss our arguments for the convergence properties of our fixed point iteration algorithm. And one of the arguments here is the argument of ordering. So the idea is that we should first simplify the presentation of the analysis by ordering the abstract values. So for our constant propagation data flow analysis example, the abstract values are bottom, constant C, and the value top. And let's just put use a less than operator, which is going to order it, and say, let's just assume that bottom is less than C for any C, and then that C is less than top. Right? And this is just an arbitrary operator that I've created now. And I'm going to use this operator, the less than operator, to basically be able to reason about the convergence properties of my algorithm. So I'm assuming once again that the bottom is less than C, and we are also assuming that C is less than top, and we are the less than operator is supposed to be transitive. That's why we are using this symbol. And so if bottom is less than C and C is less than top, then bottom is also less than top. Right? So less than is a transitive operator. Okay, and actually this is not a total ordering, but it's something which is called a partial ordering, which means among all the possible values, it's not necessary that all values are comparable, but there are some values that are comparable and some that are not. So another way to write a partial order is in this way. So I'm just kind of, instead of a horizontal representation, have turned it into a vertical representation and used a directed arrow to represent the less than operator. So for example, an arrow from top to C indicates that C is less than top, and an arrow from C to bottom represents that bottom is less than C. All right, and C is not actually a value. C is actually a placeholder for any constant value. So for example, the right way to say this is, for example, 0 is less than top and bottom is less than 0. And in fact, 0 is just one of the values. So there are many other abstract values that are possible. For example, 1, 2, 3, or -1, -2, -3, or whatever other values that your variable of interest may be able to take. And in this case, we're basically saying that any of these constant values, for example, 2 is less than top and bottom is less than 2. Right? But notice that this picture is not saying anything about what is the relationship between 1 and 2. All right, so 1 is neither less than 2 nor is it greater than 2. Okay, in this ordering, in this notion of less than operator. And so that's why it's called a partial ordering, because only some values basically are related by the less than operation, by the ordering operation, and others are just not comparable. So for example, all the constants are just incomparable. Okay, so we soon understand why this kind of an ordering relation is meaningful. And so in this kind of ordering, we basically, even though it is a partial order, we can talk about the greatest value. The greatest value is a value which is not less than any other value in my set of values, right? And in this case, that is top. And there could be multiple greatest values, but in this particular example, there's only one greatest value, which is top. Similarly, the least value is the value which is less than everything else in the set, right? And in this case, that's the bottom value. And once again, there could be multiple bottom values, but multiple least values. But in this particular example, there's only one least value, which is the bottom value. All right. So with that, we can also define the notion of a greatest lower bound. So greatest lower bound, or GLB, of 2 or more elements is the greatest value that is lower by the less than equal to operator than both x and y. Now notice that I have, there's a subtlety here. I just changed the less than operator to the less than equal to operator. The main difference between less than and less than equal to operator is that the less than equal to operator is also reflexive. So x is less than equal to x is true. All right. So that's the only difference. So, it also says that, equal things are also kind of ordered using less than equal to, whereas in the case of less than, it was only the unequal things that were related by the less than operator. And we would be from here on interested in the less than equal to operator. So we are interested in an operator that's both reflexive, which means the same element is related to itself using this operator, which is true for the less than equal to operator, and it's transitive, which is true for both less than and less than equal to operator. So GLB xy is the greatest value that is lower by the less than equal to operator, not the less than operator, than both x and y. All right. So it's the greatest value that's lower than both x and y. Okay. And this, although I'm showing GLB with 2 arguments, you could extend this to more than 2 arguments as well. For example, GLB XYZ is the greatest value that's lower than all 3 of x, y, and z. Alright, so let's take some examples to understand GLB in more detail. So for example, in this particular partial ordering that I have drawn here, GLB of top comma 1 is 1. So what is the greatest value that's less than equal to both 1 and top? It is 1. Recall that we're using the less than equal to operator, which is reflexive, and so we're going to, so 1 is less than equal to 1 and 1 is also less than equal to top. And so the answer will be 1. So GLB of top comma 1 is 1. Similarly, GLB of bottom comma top is bottom. Right? What's the element that's lower than both bottom and top? There's only one such element, and that's bottom. And so the answer is bottom. Notice that the order of the arguments doesn't matter. I could have switched and said what is the GLB of top comma bottom, and the answer is going to be still the same. So the order of arguments doesn't matter. Similarly, what is GLB of 2 comma bottom? Bottom again, just like just say 2 and bottom. So what is the greatest element that's lower than both bottom and 2? That's this bottom. What is the GLB of 1 comma 2? So 1 and 2. So what is the greatest element that's lower than both 1 and 2? Can it be 1? No, because 1 is less than equal to 1, but 1 is not less than equal to 2. Recall that 1 and 2 are incomparable. So similarly, 2 cannot be the answer, and so the only answer here can be bottom. All right. So one way to think about the GLB is it's the when you start descending, it's the first node that's common as you start descending from the 2 elements x and y, or any number of multiple elements. And what's the GLB, for example, of 1, 2, and top? Once again, that's bottom. All right. So what's the greatest element that's lower than both 1, 2, and top? The only element that is true that satisfies this is the bottom element. Okay. All right. So with the definition of GLB, the rules 1 to 4 in our constant propagation algorithm that were basically relating predecessor values to successor values. Recall that this was the diagram for rules 1 to 4, where there were some values at the predecessors. Let me draw them with green. And then there was a value at the successor that was supposed to be represented as a function of the values at the predecessors, and that was a transfer function. And so now we can represent this function as, there were 4 different rules which said, if it's top, then this is what should happen. If it's bottom, then this is what should happen. Now with the GLB definition, it becomes really easy to write those 4 rules as a single rule. And the rule is that the value at Sx in, so statement S, input of statement S for variable x is the GLB of CPX out for all predecessors of S. All right. So just look at all these values. For example, let's say this was value V1 and let's say this was value V2. Then basically just take the GLB, the greatest lower bound of V1 and V2, and that would be the value V3 at the successor. All right. So the value at the successor's input is the GLB of all the values at the predecessor's outputs, right? Because there could be multiple predecessors. If there's only one predecessor, then the GLB of a single element is just the element itself. But if there are multiple predecessors, then the value would be the GLB of all those multiple values, the greatest lower bound. Okay, and you can confirm this by just looking at those rules again, and it is actually by design we've defined GLB in such a way that that this property is actually true. Okay, now here's the convergence argument. With this definition of GLB and this partial ordering, we can now have our convergence argument, and the argument is, recall that in our fixed point iteration algorithm we had this statement which says repeat until nothing changes. All right. And the question was, why won't the iteration algorithm go on forever, right? Maybe, things just keep changing. And you may say, but why will they keep changing? Well, maybe they keep oscillating, or maybe they just, the first time it's 0, the second time it's 1, 2, 3, because there's an infinite number of values that are possible or it could just go from 1 to bottom to 1 to bottom to 1 to bottom, or something like that, right? So anything can happen. What's the argument that it's going to definitely converge? This iteration algorithm will converge. Recall that the iteration algorithm converges when nothing changes. And the only reason that it will not converge is that it keeps changing forever, right? And one reason for it to keep changing forever is because there is an infinite number of elements in my set. It can just keep taking a different value each time. And the other reason for it to keep going on forever is it can oscillate between the same number of values. It can oscillate between a finite number of values. For example, it can oscillate between 1 and bottom, or 1 and 2, or whatever. So GLB will explain why, all right, and that's the next slide. So by using GLB, we are going to be able to prove that the fixed point iteration will for sure converge. And so here's the argument. Recall that in our initial state, the values start at top, and from there, because top is the greatest value, the values can only decrease, all right. Now, for example, top can change to C, and C can change to bottom. Okay, and these are the only two possibilities that can happen, because top can change to C because maybe I stepped across a statement that was assigning a constant C to the variable X, and so it changed to C. And eventually C may change to bottom because maybe the predecessor value was bottom, and that because of that I became bottom, or because I was meeting across two different constant values and I became bottom, and things like that. But it cannot happen that top changed to some constant C, maybe the C is 0, and in another iteration now it changed to 1. I mean, that just cannot happen, because after all, why can 0 become 1? Firstly, why could it become 0? Because either there was a statement that assigned 0, in which case now it can never become 1, or it could be because of multiple predecessors meeting at the same point. But in that case, we are going to take a GLB of the existing values, and then because the predecessor values are decreasing, the successor value can also decrease. So this can be kind of this is the intuitive argument. This can be proved more formally using induction on the structure of the control flow graph of the program. But here is the intuitive argument that you can only the values will only start at top, and then they can only decrease in this chain. So from top they can go to, let's say, some C, and from C maybe they stabilize at C, or maybe they go from that C to bottom. They cannot go from one C1 to another C2 or anything like that. And also they can never go up. So once they are C, they can not become top again. And similarly, if they are bottom ones, they cannot become C anymore, right? So that's the argument. And so thus CSX in or out can change at most twice, right? So any value for a given statement S and for a given variable X, we are assuming it's a single variable for now. And so for given a statement S, the value can only change twice at most, right? From top it can go to some constant C, and then from that constant C it can either remain there, in which case it will only change once, or it can go to bottom, in which case it would have changed twice. So any value throughout the duration of the algorithm can only change twice. And that's basically the root of our convergence argument. What is the maximum number of steps that the fixed point iteration would take? Well, the iteration goes on if there was some change, but the changes are unidirectional. They can only go from upper layer to lower layer, or they can stay where they are, right? So if the changes are unidirectional, then the question is how many different changes are possible in the worst case. And in the worst case, because each iteration must have a change, and a change is only in a single direction, so the maximum number of steps that would happen is the number of values that we need to compute. Let's say the values, let's call that number of CSX in, out, in/out values that need to be computed into 2. Why is this 2 coming? Because at most 2 changes to each value, right? And the iteration goes on until there is some value that has changed. So at most all values, in the worst case, all values will change twice. That's the worst case actually. And so the maximum number of steps I'll have is basically number of these values into 2. All right, and after that, I'm sure everything would be bottom, because if it's still going on, by the time everything would be bottom, and then I will definitely converge for sure. Hopefully I'll converge earlier than that, because if everything is bottom, that's not very useful information. So maybe some of them will become constant, some of them will remain top and things like that, and that would be more useful. But even in the worst case, even if everything becomes bottom, I would definitely be done within 2 into the number of values. And then how many number of values are there, right? So what are the number of values? What is the number of C, SX in out values? Well, at most there could be 2 such values for every statement. Actually there'll be fewer ones, because within a basic block we just kind of, it's the same value. Between 2 statements we just use 1 value. But at most, even if there were n statements in the program, then the number of such values is only 2. And so so the total number of steps that the algorithm will take is number of program statements into 4. All right, that's just coming from the fact that at most 2 C values per statement, one before and one after. Okay, actually these are worst case bounds. Typically these bounds are going to be tighter, because there are less than 2 C values per statement on average, and also this is just worst case, that every value will change twice. Maybe some values will not change twice, in which case we will have less number of iterations. Also some values, during some iterations, multiple values may change in one go and things like that. Maybe you can pick 2 things that can be changed simultaneously, things like that. Okay, but that analysis was just for one variable X, right? Recall that CSX in out is basically being calculated for one variable X. We are iterating over all possible, we did consider in our analysis all possible statements, and that's what we said, number of statements into 4. We also looked at all possibilities of in and out, so that's how the 2 factor came in. But what about different variables, right? There could be multiple variables in my program, and so one option here is to run separately for each variable. All right, so just identify what are all the variables that you want to run in for. Of course, the number of variables will be less than the number of statements in your program, assuming 3 address code. And in that case, you can just run this for every variable separately, in which case you can multiply the execution time estimate by the number of variables, right? And this is not much, because typically, this just means that it's quadratic in in size of the program. For a single variable, we just showed that it is linear in the size of the program. It's just 4 into the size of the program, where number of statements is being used as a proxy for the size of the program. And if I run it separately for each variable, then it would be quadratic in the size of the program. Option 2 is to keep track of all variables simultaneously. So rather than doing this for one variable at a time, why don't I keep track of all the variables simultaneously? And this way, I just need to modify the transfer function such that it kind of just looks at every variable separately and does it. And you may say, oh, but how did it improve my performance? Well, looking at a set of variables in one go is often cheaper than looking at each variable separately, right? And so you can modify the transfer function so that you can update multiple values in one step. For example, you can represent a set of variables using a fast data structure that allows, let's say, order 1 or order login, update access and things like that. And using these tricks, you can improve the performance, and that's what's typically done. I would also like to point out that if you track all variables simultaneously, it also sometimes gives you more information simultaneously. For example, if you have a statement like x equals y plus z, and if you are kind of keeping track of both y and z simultaneously, and you know that y and z are constant at this point at the input of the statement, then you can also infer that x is a constant. And this is only possible because you were dealing with x, y, and z simultaneously. On the other hand, if I had dealt with y separately and z separately and x separately, then my analysis would have been weaker in the sense that it would have given me a less precise solution. So recall that one of the questions that you want to ask is, how precise is my solution? And we're going to discuss those things later on. But I just want to point out that if you do things separately, then you may end up with a less precise solution than if you do things together in some situations for some types of analysis. And I gave you an example. And we'll talk about this in our later lecture modules.